Speaking of which, I'd like to welcome to the Majority Report executive producer emeritus, now the political director. Is that correct?
Political director,
Council of Progressives United. That is Russ Feingold's group out of Wisconsin, which is fighting money in politics. Josh Orton. Hello, Josh.
Hi, Sam. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. I'm excited to be the first guest to talk about the problems we have with Sam Seder segment.
Oh, well, do you want to weigh in? You should really be doing this on YouTube.
Are we ineligible?
Are you? Well, I don't know. That we got to check. Maybe one of the problems is that I make producers ineligible. I'm not sure yet.
What about
my first beef is you got to change your outgoing voicemail message, guy.
What's that, on my phone?
Yeah, it's just like it's the same joke over and over again. It's like we get it.
Well,
it's like a 30-second voicemail joke that you hear for months. It's like, okay, is that the joke? Is that I'm sick of calling you because I'm hearing your voicemail message?
I get, my neighbor who called me yesterday with this news that set me racing was like, I was calling you. I spoke to him last night. He's like, I was calling you with this serious message, and I had to sit through your joke voicemail outgoing message. It was weird. But he enjoyed it, Josh. All right, so is that the problem? My outgoing voicemail message?
Yeah, because he heard it one time.
Right.
Is why he enjoyed it.
Okay.
Josh,
ask him on the 700th time.
You can ask. You can just hit pound, Josh, and pass.
There's a radio term we learned at Air America called burn rate, Sam. High burn rate on that joke.
High burn rate. All right.
Can I just interject really briefly here before you guys get to Wisconsin? Maybe a rule is no current producers, but a producer emeritus could produce a video. And the other thing, Josh, is I mean, the other problem that you had with Sam, I also thought was his sort of stunning anti-Semitism, if you'd like to speak to that as well.
Yeah, it's crippling.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, Josh, what's the deal with Wisconsin voters? My understanding is they're not very sharp.
You know, it's funny. There was an RNC co-chair who was campaigning for Walker in Waukesha County, which is like the beet red county right outside of Milwaukee. This is where the ballots were lost before. This is sort of the subject of jokes. It's one of the most Republican counties in the state. And she said, "Well, I know this is going to be tough because I know that some Wisconsin voters aren't quite as sharp as a knife." And there's a couple ways to interpret this. One is a sort of less cynical. Well, Democrats just don't understand how great all the things that Scott Walker did, and that we have to tell them all the progress, and they don't understand because they're not small business owners, and blah blah blah. There's the more cynical interpretation, and I'll leave it to you which you think is more likely. Where there's this conversation about there's this long conversation, bogus conversation about voter ID in Wisconsin. Right-wing talk radio hosts always talk about how they're going to bus up people from Chicago to illegally vote, which you can imagine, and that that they're going to bring out the vans and they're going to scoop up all these low information voters all across Milwaukee and drag them to the polls. So there's a question of whether or not that comment had sort of an uglier tinge to it, and in either case, I think it's interesting because in a midterm like this, Democrats have to increase turnout, and the Republicans sort of have the advantage in a midterm in Wisconsin because their regular voting blocks, like older people, wealthier people, white people, are more reliable voters. So, insulting the Democratic base is an interesting strategy for Republicans, but, it's sort of part and parcel to how Scott Walker's governed.
Yeah, I mean, how much disdain do you have to have? Like, I get that they probably say this stuff behind closed doors, right? I mean, it's not hard to imagine that politicians of all stripes have a disdain for certain segments of their the voting bloc. But how are you? And this woman is Sharon Day. How much disdain do you have to say this in public, like this is not going to cost. You must really, really have just total disregard. And in many respects, that does mirror Scott Walker's, I think, sort of, the way that he has been governing in that state. So are Wisconsin voters, are they going to be sharp as a knife and vote Walker out, or what?
Well, the funny thing is, you're right about how Walker's governed. It's, he openly talks about, in the first debate, he basically said literally that Wisconsin doesn't have a jobs problem, it has a work problem. And what he's been saying, and what Republican Senator Ron Johnson said just a couple of days ago, they talk about how there's these open jobs and there's all these possibilities, but they're implying that because, and Walker says this outright, is that the reason why we need to cut government assistance is because it creates this cycle of dependence, and it basically, he basically says that people are too lazy to work, and he blames our unemployment rate in part on the fact that people don't want to work and are sort of on the government tit. So actually, I don't think this is really any different from that. They're talking about the same, in their minds, they're talking about the same people. They're talking about the people that they think are lazy and they're talking about Mitt Romney's takers, right? I think that, Barack Obama's coming here next week to Milwaukee for turnout. Bill Clinton's going to be here on Friday.
Wow.
For the first time in a while, in the last couple of weeks, I've really felt the momentum changing. Robert Costa, he used to be at National Review.
Yes.
And is now at the Washington Post.
Yes.
He went around with Walker on the trail in the last couple of days, and he said he's never seen Walker more scared. He said that he's trying to grind it out. Walker's desperately trying to get the Republican Governors Association to spend, I think it's like $6 million more for the ad air war here, because he's worried that he's sort of losing his grip on this election. And look, I am never sort of overconfident about elections. I don't think this would be anywhere close to a type of margin in a presidential year. But, I think Mary Burke has done a really great job introducing herself, keeping this as a referendum on Scott Walker and how he didn't create jobs, how he's an extremist. I have a glimmer of hope. Walker's trying to run from stuff. I don't know if you watched any of the debates, but, he was asked over and over again about his position on abortion. And Walker is against abortion even in cases of rape and incest. And he's pretending he's not. This is happening with other Republican candidates. He just says, "Well, I'm for life," and he's really getting hammered on that. Women's groups like Emily's List and NARAL and Planned Parenthood are exposing his record. And I think if we get base turnout in Milwaukee and Madison above the recall, and Mary Burke steals some women and some independent voters, I think we have got a good shot.
I'm curious about the dynamic of him appealing to the Republican Governors Association for more money, because the chair of that committee is Christie. And I got to think, when we contemplate 2016, Scott Walker and Chris Christie are sort of in the same silo, it seems to me, where they are more soft-spoken in some respects. I mean, not soft-spoken is probably the wrong way, but they appear as more moderate than the Rick Perrys of the Republican field. I think one of the biggest sort of winners with Chris Christie's legal problems has been Scott Walker, I would imagine. But Chris Christie controls, or I don't know how much he controls, but at least he's the head of the Republican Governors Association. Can Walker expect that money to show up?
It's interesting. There's a couple ways to look at it. There's a sort of one-dimensional, look, Chris Christie may not shed a tear if Walker loses this re-election and basically kills his chances at the Republican presidential primary in 2016. He's probably not eager to support Walker. There's a sort of a couple more dimensional chess question of whether Scott Walker is someone that Chris Christie wants in the race. Scott Walker, to the extent that we can ever say that Chris Christie is moderate on any specific thing, Scott Walker is not Chris Christie. Scott Walker is, the son of a preacher. He has been a politician, an elected politician, his entire professional career, and he is running his brand, his benefit that he will sell in the 2016 presidential primary if he gets there, is that he can campaign and implement far-right ideas like union bashing, like transvaginal ultrasounds, like all these other things, stripping laws that allow women to make claims for employment discrimination. That he can do that in a purple state like Wisconsin. But the reality is that in the last few weeks of this election, he's working overtime to try and hide that. He ran an ad in response to these attacks on his record on abortion, basically saying, "Look, I'm pro-life, but," and it's him sort of hazy, straight to camera, and it's him trying to basically fool people into thinking that he's not pro-life. He says he's pro-life, but ultimately, the law we passed left the decision between a woman and her doctor. And it's like, well, yeah, of course, because the Supreme Court forced you to. You could not pass a law that did not leave that decision between a woman and a doctor. But that ad, that 30-second ad, the first thing I thought when I saw this is, wow, if he gets to the presidential primary in 2016, this ad is going to be used against him.
Right.
And I wonder. There's a question of how long someone like Walker would survive in a 2016 presidential primary. So I really don't know. I don't know how Christie is thinking about Walker in terms of whether or not it's in comparison to Paul Ryan or the whole field. But I do think it's an interesting dynamic that not only is Chris Christie the chair of the Republican Government Association, but Walker is basically pleading for this money publicly, which is not super common.
Yeah, it's strange. Well, you'll keep us updated as we get closer to the race. Josh Orton going back to compiling his problems with Sam Seder.
Oh, guys, send me emails if you want to sort of get it in. You can launder the complaints through me.
Oh, and we should say, what's your Twitter handle, Josh?
Oh, thanks for asking. It's at Josh Orton.
At
J-O-S-E.
Josh Orton. Folks, you should be following Josh Orton on Twitter.
You'll be able to tell all of the producer complaints if they're coming from someone else, because they will be almost exclusively about your clothing.
There you go. Josh thinks my attire is a little bit something left to be desired. Josh Orton, thanks so much.
Bye, Sam.
All right. Follow Josh on Twitter, folks.